So we're just going to start off on the computer screen just so I can explain what we're trying to achieve and how we're going to actually make this soap mould. Now, when we want our silicone mould, we need to effectively have two cubes, and they're going to fit inside each other because we need to form something that will give us the perimeter to actually make that soap mould. So we're going to start off with a small cube first of all. Now, this small cube is basically going to be the exact size that you want your soap to be. So that's going to be our smaller cube. And then the other cube, the larger cube, this cube over here is going to be slightly bigger. It's going to be bigger to the extent of how thick we want the walls of our silicone to be. So we need to make both of these cubes, and then what we'll do is we'll take this small cube and we need to grab it and pop it inside this larger cube. And it's doing that then will allow us to have a channel to actually go through and pour the silicone and actually make the silicone mould that we need. So let's think about this little cube in a little bit more detail. Now remember, this is going to be the cube that's going to actually give you the bar of soap that you want. So when we think about the dimensions, obviously you want to make it to the size that you want your end bar of soap to be. However, it's probably worth just making it perhaps a little bit taller than the bar of soap. So for example, if you imagine this is your height of your soap mould, it's probably going to be a good idea just to make it a little bit taller than the bar. And the reason for that is it's nice to not have to pour right to the top of your silicone liner, so it's leaving yourself a little bit of a gap. Also as well, when you've made your mould, you may find that there's a little bit of a rough edge right at the top, and again, you don't want that actually where you're going to pour the soap. So add a little bit of extra leeway to the height. And then when we think about the way that we're going to pour the silicone is actually going to end up being poured up and over and round, obviously, all the edges of the mould like that. And what that actually means that when we think of our mould, it's actually going to be sort of upside down. So as you look at it, we're going to have this edge here is actually going to be the bottom of your silicone mould. Can you see how that blue line goes round and actually forms the base of your silicone mould? And then this bit here, this face here at the bottom of the mould, is actually going to be the top. That's going to be the open bit where you're going to end up pouring your silicone into. Now, why it's important that you understand this is because it's really important that when you put this box together, think about where you're going to have your faces being exposed with those sort of cut lines, as it were. You might conveniently have a splendid box that you want to use as a mould, and that's great. But if you're making your own, you're going to be joining pieces of material together, and there will be join lines and there will be a thickness on it. So how I'm going to look at doing ours is thinking about with those join lines. So if you imagine with your mould, there will be a thickness to the materials that we're going to be using. Okay, so there will be some small joins around. Now, where do we want those joins to show? I would say I would much rather have the joins, and they're only going to be tiny weeny little lines, you know, they're not going to be great big joins unless you're really rubbish at putting a box together. You know, these are going to just be more or less sort of like tiny little marks, that's all. I'd much rather have these on the end surfaces there, because as we know, when we cut a bar of soap, it's quite likely that we take off those funny little end bits anyway. What I want to do is I want to keep this flat surface here, the length of my bar of soap. I want to keep that nice and clean. I don't want any marks on there. So that's the way I'm going to build it, that I'm going to have that as one solid piece, and then the surfaces where things join together, those are going to be at the end. Also thinking about how we put the top in. Again, I want to keep this side nice and clear, so therefore you're going to see my joins from the thickness of the material meeting there at the top of this cube. And what that will mean to us is, again, we're going to have these tiny little lines potentially, which if you think about it, when that flips upside down, that will actually be the base of your soap. It won't be the top of your soap, it will be the base of your soap. And again, tiny wee little lines, you might want to plane those off. You may not even bother about it, it's probably not going to be noticeable. But what you're not going to do is you're not going to see them all down the sides of your soap. Okay, so let's have a look at our little plan then. Now I've only done it sort of all snazzy like this just so I can show you on the computer screen, just roughly drawing it out on a piece of paper. It doesn't even have to be straight, you know, as long as you've worked out your dimensions, that's all you need to do. So it doesn't have to be all fancy. Now we've got to think about how we actually cut the pieces that we need to make sure that we get the joins going to the right places. So if you remember, we said the thing that we wanted to preserve, the nice pristine side, was these long sides. So I've decided with my soap mould, I'm only doing a tiddly little one for this video because I don't really need another soap mould, so I'm just going to make a small one just for demonstration purposes of how to make one, and then I'll use it for, you know, testing things and whatever in the future. So as you can see here, what I've got is that this long side, I've said I want my soap mould to actually be 7 centimetres by 11 centimetres, so 7 centimetres high by 11 centimetres long, and that's the length and the height that I actually want my soap mould to be. And I'm going to cut 2 of those because obviously I've got 2 sides. Then we've got to think about the top and the bottom. If you think about the top and the bottom, remember we were going to sink those, weren't we, into the other bits. So if you remember, what we're going to do is we're going to have a short bit going here, another short bit going here. Oh, that one disappeared. Let's put that one back in. And then we're going to have our long bits. Oops, excuse the wiggly old lines there. Going there like that. So can you see therefore for a 7 centimetre thing that I want, because mine's going to be 7 centimetres wide by 7 centimetres tall by 11 centimetres long, because I'm going to have my foam board each side and it's 5 millimetres thick, I'm going to have 5 mils each side, so therefore my top I need to take a centimetre off and it will now be 6 centimetres. And the same with the length of it. I'm going to have those 5 mils top and bottom, so I need to reduce my top and bottom there by 1 centimetre. Okay, so there's my top and bottom, and there's my long sides. And then my end pieces. So with the end pieces, these are going to be fitting in here, aren't they? So can you see we need our end piece to be the same width as this top or bottom, so 6 centimetres. And the end piece, remember again, we said it's going to swallow the top and the bottom, isn't it? So therefore this needs to be the full height of the soap that we actually want. Okay, so there's our inside our box that we're going to have. And then the outside box. So looking at the top, remember we don't need a top and a bottom now. We're not making a cube this time. We're just making sort of a trough to sit the other cube into. So we obviously need it bigger than that inside cube. Now, if you're working with a 5 millimetre width for the amount of your silicone, can you see there you're going to need that both sides of your cube, aren't you? So if you remember our soap mould, we said the actual soap, we wanted it to be 7 centimetres. And that was the overall width, wasn't it, that we made our bar. So if we want our soap to be 7 centimetres, we then want our silicone to be 0.5 centimetre. So therefore we need to make the base 8 centimetres in total. And then again, we're going to put the sides up against it. Now with the sides, as you can you see here all I've done is written 8 centimetres plus? Because what's going to happen with these sides is effectively they literally are going to be the sides that you're going to pour into. So I'm not really fussed about how tall they are. Just make sure that they're tall enough so you can pour the silicone in. If they're taller, then that's not a problem. You just stop pouring when you get to the height that you need. So I've just said 8 centimetres plus. So as long as I don't cut them shorter than that, then that's fine. And then the long side wise, now notice here, remember we said our mould, wasn't it, was going to be 11 centimetres for our mould. So you might be thinking, why on earth have I said 13 centimetres plus? Again, just because of the way I'm going to construct it. As long as I don't go below, well, actually 12 centimetres, isn't it? Because that's the 11 centimetre mould plus the 1 centimetre for my silicone on the both sides, then that's going to be fine. I'm just going to make sure I make it longer than that, and you'll see why when we actually do the construction. Okay, so that's the top and the long sides. And then the end pieces, again, the end pieces, what we're going to do is we're going to make that the same width as the base there. And again, just make it the same, this length here, just make it whatever length you made this bit up here. Because then you can have a, you know, it doesn't matter if the sides are all different heights, you know, but I just find it nicer if they are the same height. So as long as they're tall enough, you can make them taller. Okay, so there's all our pieces planned out that we need. Now, admittedly, that was quite a lot of information and might have done your brains in a little bit. So what I've done is I've gone over the plan that I've just talked through, and as you can see here, I've tried to just put some sort of annotations on. Now, this will obviously only work if you're using like a 5mm thick foam board or some sort of 5mm thick material. You'd have to tweak it if you're using anything different to that. So as you can see, what I've done is I've just gone through and explained how you could then work this out by putting some annotations over the top for whatever soap mould that you would potentially like to be using. And I'm going to try in the description to put a link to where you can find this file. I'm going to load it up to OneDrive or something, and hopefully I'll be able to put a link in the description so you can go and grab this with all the annotations on and use it if you want to work out your own soap mould box dimensions. Okay, so let's have a look at what we're going to need. We're going to need some sort of thing to make our mould out of. Now, silicone is pretty good at not sticking to many things at all. I just like using foam board. It's really cheap to buy. I can buy 3 sort of quite huge sheets of it for £10, so I'm sure you can get it in most places. You could use cardboard, you could use wood, all sorts of things. It doesn't really mind. I've actually done all my planning and everything using a 5mm thick foam board, so therefore that's what all the plans are actually worked out on. You're going to need something to cut it with, so a nice sharp knife, some sort of craft knife or another type of sharp knife, something to do your measuring with, so a ruler, a pencil. Also, a hot glue gun is really useful. You can just use tape, but a hot glue gun is going to be probably your best bet, and some sort of sticky tape. I've also got mine sitting on top of a cutting mat. Now, you don't need a cutting mat at all. I just happen to have one, and I just find it just easier for your measuring and your cutting. Now for the silicone. Now there's lots of types of silicone around. I have seen people trying to make moulds out of, you know, the actual bathroom silicone that you squeeze around your shower or your bath. We're not talking about that type of silicone. I would actually get some proper silicone. Now I use this 1-to-1 easy mould. It's available in the UK. There are lots of similar versions that you can get in the US. Some of them are 1-to-1 mix, some of them are where you have a base and you put a smaller amount in. So just be careful and read what it is that you're actually getting. Also, with regards to buying the silicone, you'll quite often find that it will be different strengths, or you might hear it being called a shore thickness. Now, I tend to, for my moulds, use a soft silicone, and I believe that's a 15 shore. So look out for something like that. The reason I always go for a softer silicone is because I want my sides of my moulds to be nice and flexible so they bend nicely, so I can push my soap out without damaging it or denting it. If you get a medium or a hard silicone, then you're going to find they aren't flexible and you could cause some damage when you push your soap out. So as I said, a soft silicone around about that sort of 15 shore would be maybe something that you're looking for. So now I'm just going to start the cutting process, starting with the inside box first. I'm not going to play this through in actual speed, watching you sort of watch me cut things out. Just a couple of things to note is you need to make sure everything is square. So don't just rely on the edge of a piece of whatever you're cutting to be square. Make sure you're squaring it up. If you've got a set square, that will be perfect. Cutting mats are brilliant for doing that. Okay, so as I say, just go through and cut all the bits and pieces that you need for the inside box. So now I'm just moving on to the outside box, and all I'm doing here is, do you remember those things that I had as 8+ or whatever? I'm just really considering how tall I'm going to make this, and I'm pretty sure I'll decide on 12 centimetres as a good amount, so therefore I'm just going to use that as the guide and start cutting up my bits and pieces. Now with the outside box, I want to use the base and the sides all in one piece, just to minimise as many cuts as possible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut those all in one long section, then I'm just going to score through where the cut lines would have been, but not going all the way through the foam board, and then I can just fold the foam board up, and that's going to make sure that you've got just a nice solid seam where no silicone or anything is going to leak out of. And then we just want to get the inside box put together. Now, just remembering the way that we need to construct it, that we need the top and bottom sort of getting inside of those side pieces and just popping them all together. Now, it's really important that when you make the joins through some tape or some glue, you must do all of the joins on the inside. So I hot glue gun on the inside, put in a piece, hot glue gun a bit more until I've actually constructed the whole box. For the top piece, you won't be able to hot glue gun it because obviously you won't be able to get inside. So for this piece, I'm just going to put it in, and it's quite a nice snug tight fit. And then I'm going to very carefully just go over it with some tape so that the top's not going to come off it or anything weird like that. Go over it with some tape and carefully just make sure I smooth it down so I don't make any creases or anything. And there's my box completed. And then for the outer box, I pop the inside box in and I just pack it out with a piece of foam board to get the exact distance away from that inner box that I need. Mark the base where it needs to go, and then I'm going to hot glue it and then pop that into the space where it needs to go on the outside box. Do make sure you let this glue go off really well, because the silicone can get right under there and push that inner box away. So do make sure that dries off well. Once that's really nice and secure, again, you'd now want to finish the outer box by using offcuts of the foam board to get the exact distance that you need for your silicone. So just go through, pack around with little offcuts, use some bits of tapes as support as you need because you're bound to run out of hands. And once you've done that, you can slot the end sides in, hot glue it all down, and then just wait for that to all set up, and then you can pour in your silicone. And then lastly, what you want to do is just take a spare bit of foam board and lay it on top of your little mould and just do a mark all the way round here, and that will give you the depth that you want to pour to give you a 5mm base. Now if you want a thicker base than that, then put 2 bits of board in or something, okay, but that will tell you when to stop pouring. At last we've got to the point where we can now start putting in our silicone. Now to work out how much silicone we need to work out the volume of the inside and the outside mould. So if you literally work out the width times the height times the length, of the outside box, the internal measurements, and then do the same for the inside box, the width times the height times the length, the outside bits. Take one away from the other, and that will now give you your volume that you need for your silicone. Check the bottle on your silicone, it might give you a density on it. Mine has a density of 1.08, so therefore that means whatever volume calculation you get, you need to times by 1.08, and that will tell you how much silicone you need. Once you've got that measurement, you now know that you've got, in my case, a 50-50 mix of the silicone. So I take that volume measurement, divide it by 2, and I pour equal amounts of silicone into my jug from both parts of the silicone mixtures. Now you want to mix your silicone really well. Some silicones come in 2 different colours, so you can tell nice and easily when you're mixed. But perhaps mix them for longer than you really think you should, maybe a good 2 or 3 minutes when you're mixing. And you want to mix them really, really carefully. Okay, nice and slowly mixing. And the reason for that is because this just attracts air bubbles like mad, far worse than anything we have with a stick blender. As soon as you sort of get any sort of vigorous stirring going in, it fills up with air bubbles. So nice and slowly does it, and make sure everything's well incorporated. And now at last we can pour this into our mould. Now you've got to be careful, you don't want to cause any airlocks or air bubbles, so do make sure that you pour in a really nice thin stream and just give it lots of time to sink down into all of the sides that you've got. And then once you're up to that little pencil line that you drew around to mark the base level, then you can stop. You're all done, and you just need to set it aside. Mine takes about 1 to 2 hours to set, but again, check your manufacturer's instructions to see how long you need to set it for. And then a couple of hours later, everything's nicely set up, so we can now take off the outside box. I've tried to preserve these outside bits, but you can't. You can normally get the inside cube out nice and cleanly, but I've never managed to preserve an outside cube. So unfortunately, if you want to make another one, you're going to have to make that outside box again. And you may find, and it's very likely actually, that the very top edge of the mould, some of it will have seeped a little bit under the base of that box. So therefore that's just nice and easy just to go through and snip away those tiny little bits that went inside to leave yourself with a nice smooth ring at the top. Now I'm not going to go over how to make the wooden box. In essence, it's basically the same as making the other 2 boxes, especially the outside box. As you can see, it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, and it doesn't matter if the joins are a little bit gappy. I've just made mine out of some sort of basic bits and pieces of wood that are found in the garage, and just screwed them together to make me a box for the outside. And as you can see, you can just use this to make any sort of mould that you like, and various boxes. And whether it's just a square mould, a slab mould, a loaf mould, or even a uniquely shaped mould, like for example this one that I've got for a special embed that I actually designed and made myself. So I've literally made a mould for that, and you can see I've got a very, very funny, peculiar shaped box for that, just to keep it nice and sturdy and help it go through gel frays. I hope you found this video useful. It has gone on for quite a while, but there was quite a lot of detail that needed to be put in to be able to explain everything that you needed to know properly. If you did find it useful, it'd be brilliant if you did give me a thumbs up and maybe leave a comment, especially if you've got any questions. I'm always good at answering questions on any comments. And maybe if you'd like to, perhaps subscribe to my channel so you can see what I'm going to make later on.